He had buried men with steadier hands than this. Kang Do-hyun had ordered executions, faced loaded guns, and sat across boardroom tables from men who wanted him dead. And he had never once flinched. But standing inside a lawyer's office on a gray Tuesday morning, listening to his grandmother's final words read aloud from a piece of paper, he felt something crack open in the center of his chest that no enforcer and no enemy had ever managed to reach. The woman beside him, his best friend for 23 years, the one person he had never allowed himself to want, was about to become his wife. And neither of them had any idea it would destroy them both before it saved them. If this story already has your heart, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Stay with me until the very end. Bulch. The morning of the will reading, Do-hyun didn't eat. That wasn't unusual. He rarely ate before meetings where something was at stake. But this wasn't a meeting. This was his grandmother's apartment, stripped of her presence now, smelling faintly of the chrysanthemum tea she had brewed every morning for as long as he could remember. Her housekeeper had left the kettle on the stove out of habit. The smell hit him the moment he stepped through the door, and he stopped walking for exactly 1 second, jaw tight, before he kept moving. Because stopping was not something Kang Do-hyun did in front of other people. His parents were already seated in the living room when he arrived. His father, Kang Byung-soo, sat with the posture of a man who had spent his entire adult life reminding the world he was important. Back rigid, hands folded over one knee, reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose, even though there was nothing yet to read. His mother, Park Sun-hee, had chosen a chair slightly apart from the others, already positioned as though she was chairing the gathering rather than attending it. She looked at her son when he entered and gave him the kind of nod that contained no warmth whatsoever. The acknowledgement of a superior toward a subordinate who had arrived on time, nothing more. Do-hyun nodded back. That was the full extent of their greeting. His cousin Seorin was already there too, seated near the window with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking. She was 31, thin-wristed, composed in the way of someone who had practiced composure extensively in private. She looked at Do-hyun when he entered and smiled, the kind of smile that never reached the eyes, the kind that said, "I have already thought 3 moves further ahead than you have." He had known that smile his whole life. He had never once trusted it. "You look tired," she said. "I'm not." Grief does that, even to people who pretend it doesn't. He didn't answer. He sat down across the room from her, loosened one button at his collar, and waited. Amara arrived 8 minutes later, which was 7 minutes earlier than the scheduled time. Because Amara was always early to anything that mattered to someone she loved. She was wearing a charcoal-wrapped dress and had pulled her hair back, and she was carrying 2 coffees, one for herself and one for Do-hyun, already fixed the way he drank it, because she had been fixing his coffee for the better part of a decade without being asked. She handed it to him when she sat down beside him, and he took it without a word. And that single, unremarkable exchange, the precision of it, the quiet knowledge embedded in it, caused Seorin to watch them both with an expression that was still perfectly neutral and therefore impossible to read. The family attorney, a methodical man named Jong Tae-sung, who had managed Grandmother Kang's affairs for 18 years, arrived exactly on time. He settled into his chair with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had delivered difficult news often enough that he no longer wasted motion on drama. He opened his folder, reviewed a single page in silence, and then looked up. "I'll read the relevant provisions directly," he said. Madam Kang Yeon-suk was precise in her language, and I'll honor that by not summarizing. The room went still. What followed was straightforward at first. Property distributions, charitable endowments, personal items bequeathed to specific individuals. Do-hyun sat through all of it with the coffee warm in his hands, eyes forward, giving nothing away. Then Attorney Jong turned to the final page, and the quality of his silence changed by a fraction of a degree, just enough for Do-hyun to notice it. "Regarding the private estate valued at $50 million, Jong said carefully, "and the controlling interest in all of Madam Kang's legitimate business holdings, the following condition applies." He paused, not for effect, but because he was reading precisely. "Said assets transferred to my grandson, Kang Do-hyun, upon the condition that he enters a legal marriage within 6 months of my passing and remains legally married for a continuous period of 5 years thereafter." Should this condition not be met in full, all described assets and interests transfer unconditionally to my grandniece Kang Seorin upon the expiration of said period. Ma Jieten. No one spoke. Do Hyun set his coffee cup down. The sound it made against the table was very small and very loud at the same time. He didn't look at Seorin. He didn't need to. He could feel the quality of her stillness from across the room. The particular kind of stillness that belongs to a person absorbing a piece of information they already knew was coming. Which meant she had known. Not today, not by surprise. She had known. And she had come here this morning anyway, arranged herself in that chair by the window, smiled at him, and waited for him to find out. His mother spoke first, clipped and precise. 6 months. Correct, Jong said. That's impossible, his father said. Wait, he isn't seeing anyone. That is outside the scope of my responsibilities, Jong said. Seorin finally moved, set her untouched cup down, smoothed her skirt, and looked at Do-hyun with an expression of such careful sympathy that it was nearly insulting. I'm sorry, Oppa, she said. I know this isn't what you expected. He still didn't look at her. He was looking at his hands. The drive back across Seoul took 40 minutes, and Do-hyun didn't say a single word the entire way. His driver, a man named Choi, who had been with him for 9 years and understood silence as fluently as language, kept the partition up and didn't attempt conversation. The city scrolled past outside, gray and massive and completely indifferent, the way Seoul always was. This city that had made his family into what it was, and would continue existing long after all of them were finished with their complications. He was 34 years old. He commanded an organization of 1,200 men across 6 provinces. He had faced police surveillance, hostile takeovers, and 3 separate attempts on his life, and he had handled all of it with a steadiness that had become the single thing his subordinates most feared and most relied upon. He had, in that sense, become very much what his grandmother had wanted him to become: dangerous and disciplined, and capable of absorbing pressure without showing fracture. He had also been alone for most of his adult life, and his grandmother had known that too. She always knew. The thought of her, of the specific quality of her attention, the way she had looked at him across dinner tables when she thought he wasn't watching, as though she was holding something back that she had been waiting a long time to say, produced a tightening in his throat that he pushed down immediately and completely, because this car was moving through public streets, and Kang Do-hyun did not grieve in public. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A message from Amara. Where did you go? Not a question. Never a question with her. She didn't need the punctuation because she already knew he was somewhere he didn't want to be reached and was reaching anyway, because that was what she did, had always done. Since they were 11 years old and their families had crossed paths in Singapore, and a quiet, watchful Korean boy had found himself sitting next to a girl who spoke without apology and ate her food like it deserved her full attention and argued about things she actually cared about rather than things she was supposed to care about. 23 years. He typed back, heading home. She replied immediately, I'm coming over. He stared at that for a moment, then put the phone back in his pocket. She was already in his building lobby when he arrived, had clearly taken a different route, moved faster, done the thing she always did where she showed up before being asked. She was still in the charcoal dress, heels gone now, wearing the flat shoes she kept in her bag because she hated heels past a certain hour of the day. There was coffee again from the place around the corner from his building. 2 cups. You didn't have to come, he said. I know, she said. They went upstairs. His penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor of a building in Gangnam that his grandmother had purchased through a subsidiary company before Do-hyun was born. The view at night was the full-width panorama of Seoul, lit against the dark like something that hadn't decided yet, whether it was beautiful or threatening. Amara had been in this apartment hundreds of times. She walked through it with the ease of someone who knew exactly which floorboards had a slight give, which light switches were counterintuitive, which window in the kitchen faced east and made the morning coffee catch the light at an angle that was genuinely worth noticing. She put the cups on the counter and looked at him. Tell me, she said. So he did. He stood in his own kitchen with his jacket still on and laid it out for her. The condition, the timeline, the amount at stake. Seorin's face across that room. He kept his voice level and factual, the way he delivered briefings to his lieutenants. and Amara listened the way she always listened, which was completely, without interrupting, without flinching. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. 5 years, she said. 5 years. And if you don't, Seorin takes everything my grandmother built outside of the organization. Every legitimate business she spent 30 years cleaning and building into something real. All of it goes to someone who will strip it for parts within 18 months. He paused. I know Seorin. She doesn't want to build anything. She wants the proof that she won. Amara picked up her coffee, drank, set it back down. So you need a wife. I need a wife. Another silence. Different quality from the first one. He watched her face and she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the skyline through the kitchen window, jaw slightly set. Whatever she was thinking held behind an expression he had seen before but couldn't always fully read, which was unusual because he could read almost anyone. Do-hyun, she said finally. No. She looked at him. I haven't said anything. You're about to volunteer for something you shouldn't. How do you know what I'm about to say? Because I know you, he said. And because the look on your face right now is the same one you had when you volunteered to cover your roommate's emergency call shift, even though you had a conference presentation the next morning. You absorb other people's problems and you make them yours. And I am telling you, he stopped, restarted. This isn't a shift swap. This is 5 years, Amara. She was quiet for a moment, then, my mother's trial enrollment closes in 3 months. He went still. The treatment center in Copenhagen, she said. The one running the phase 3 trial for her cancer. I've had her application in for 8 months. They just confirmed last week that she's eligible, but the enrollment fee alone is $60,000, and that's before the treatment costs, before the accommodation, before any of it. Her voice stayed even, which cost her something. He could tell, could see the faint tension in her neck that meant the evenness was constructed rather than natural. I've been moving money around for months trying to make it work. I've applied for grants that take 6 months to process. She stopped herself, set the cup down more firmly than necessary. I'm not telling you this because I want you to pay for it. I know. I'm telling you because you need to understand what I'm weighing. He understood exactly what she was weighing. He understood it clearly enough that it landed in his chest like something blunt and heavy, and he had to take a breath before he could speak. If you do this, he said, if we actually, he made himself say the word, marry, you would be giving 5 years of your life to protect an inheritance that has nothing to do with you. It has to do with you. That isn't sufficient reason. She looked at him with an expression he felt rather than analyzed. It is for me, she said. He turned away from her, walked to the window, pressed one hand against the cold glass and looked out at the city and tried, with everything he had, to locate the argument that would make her understand this was a bad idea. Every version of the argument dissolved before it finished forming, because every version of it required him to examine why exactly he was so committed to stopping her, and the answer to that was something he could not examine in a lit kitchen with her standing 4 feet behind him. You'd have to move in, he said. I know. It has to look real. For the courts, for the family, for... He thought of Seorin's investigators, which he knew were coming, which were probably already placed. For everyone watching. I understand what real means, she said. Your research, your work schedule. I can work from here as easily as from my apartment. My lab is 12 minutes away. He ran out of objections. He was aware that he ran out of them. He turned back to face her, and she was watching him with that steady, direct quality of attention that had always been one of the most difficult things about knowing her, because she looked at him like she saw more than he showed, and most of the time he suspected she was right. If this goes wrong, he said, if it costs you something, Do-hyun. I mean it. If this... I know you mean it, she said. I'm saying yes anyway. The courthouse wedding happened on a Thursday morning in early November, 10 days after the will was read. They had told no one in advance except attorney Jong, who needed to file the marriage certificate to begin the legal clock, and Amara's mother, who cried for reasons she didn't fully explain and which Amara didn't ask her to. The ceremony lasted 11 minutes. There was a clerk, a form, a stamp, and 2 signatures. Do-hyun wore a dark suit he would have worn to any other business meeting, Amara wore a cream blouse and dark trousers and carried nothing. No flowers, no guests. When it was done, they walked out of the building into the November air and stood on the steps for a moment without speaking. "Hungry?" she said finally. "Not particularly." "Too bad." "I am." She started walking. "There's a Sundubu Jigai place 2 blocks from here. You've taken me there before. Come on." He followed her because he always followed her when she walked that way, with the particular forward certainty she deployed when she had already decided something and was simply waiting for the rest of the world to catch up. They ate soup in a restaurant that smelled like the good kind of cold weather food, and the conversation was ordinary. Her grant timeline, a problem with one of his distribution logistics chains, a film she'd watched and wanted to argue about. Perfectly ordinary. 14 years of friendship in a booth with steam rising from their bowls. No one would have looked twice at them. That was exactly what they needed. And it was, in a way that Do Hyun didn't examine too carefully, the worst thing about all of it. Moving her in happened over 3 days. She had the contained but specific possessions of someone who had lived practically and deliberately. Books organized by field rather than aesthetics. Lab notebooks stacked with the spines inward for reasons she'd explained once and he'd retained. A particular brand of loose-leaf tea she drank in the evenings that smelled faintly like cardamom. She took the guest room, which was large and had its own bath, and Do Hyun rearranged nothing in the rest of the apartment, and neither of them discussed the arrangement in detail because the arrangement was obvious, and making it explicit would have made it feel like what it was rather than what they needed it to feel like. The first morning she woke at 5:30 and moved through the apartment quietly, not trying to avoid him, but not seeking him out either. The way she moved in any space she was still calibrating. He had been awake since 4. He was in the kitchen when she appeared in the doorway, already dressed for the day despite the hour. Dark slacks, an oversized sweater, her reading glasses on. She stopped when she saw him, fractionally, the way people do when they encounter something they expected and weren't quite ready for anyway. "Coffee?" he said. "You don't have to." "I was already making it." She came in, sat at the island counter. He set a cup in front of her, fixed the way she drank it, and watched her wrap both hands around it in that particular way she had, like warmth was a resource she was careful about wasting. "I have a lab meeting at 8, she said. "I have a meeting at 7:30. "Okay." "Okay." Outside, Seoul was beginning to lighten at the edges. They sat in the kitchen that was becoming their kitchen and drank their coffee and said very little, and the silence between them had the particular texture of something very old and very large and very carefully not discussed. It was fine. It would be fine. He believed that, or was trying to, when his phone buzzed with a message from Seorin. Brief, 3 words, nothing threatening on the surface, which was exactly how she operated. "Congratulations, Oppa. I hope you're happy." He set the phone face down on the counter, said nothing. Amar glanced at it but didn't ask. And 3 weeks later, when his mother called to inform him that the family dinner the following Saturday would not include Amara, that the family did not feel prepared to receive her as a member, that certain conversations needed to happen first, that certain standards of appropriateness. Do Hyun held the phone against his ear and listened to the full length of his mother's measured language and said, "Then I won't be there either." His mother's silence lasted 4 seconds. Then, "Do Hyun, tell me when you're ready to have her at the table," he said, "and I'll be there." He ended the call. Amara was at her desk in the second bedroom, which she had arranged into a functional home workspace with the quiet efficiency she brought to every practical problem. She hadn't heard the call. She was 40 feet away behind a closed door, marking up a journal article, unaware that a war had just started over her. Do Hyun stood in the hallway with his phone in his hand and the low electric hum of the apartment around him, and tried to calculate what exactly he had just started. The answer came 12 days later in the form of an envelope slid under his office door at the Black Phoenix's headquarters building. Not his home, his office, which meant someone with access had delivered it. Inside, 3 photographs. Do Hyun and Amara at the courthouse. Do Hyun and Amara at the Sundubu restaurant. Do Hyun and Amara in the lobby of his building with her moving boxes. Below the photographs, one typed line. Fraudulent marriages are grounds for invalidation under Section 812 of the Family Code. How long do you think yours will hold? No signature, it didn't need one. He looked at the photographs for a long moment, jaw set, reading the message beneath the message. I have someone inside your life already. I have been watching since before the ink was dry. I am more patient than you have accounted for, and I am not going to stop. He put the photographs back in the envelope, placed the envelope in his desk drawer, locked it. Then he picked up his phone and called his head of security, and his voice when he spoke was completely level, which was the most dangerous it ever got. Pull all access logs for this building for the past 30 days, he said. Personal review only. No one else sees them yet. Yes, sir. And tell Sioran's driver that I hope she enjoyed her tea this morning. A pause. Do you want her to know you're aware of the surveillance? I want her to know I'm paying attention, Do-hyun said. She already knows I'm aware. Let's stop pretending otherwise. He ended the call, sat back in his chair. In 5 years of carefully constructed lies, the most dangerous thing in this building had nothing to do with Sioran's photographs. It was something Sioran didn't know about and couldn't photograph and couldn't file under Section 812 of any legal code. It lived in the kitchen every morning at 5:30 when a woman wrapped her hands around a coffee cup and Do-hyun watched her from across the counter and absolutely did not think about the fact that she was his wife. He wasn't going to survive 5 years of this. He already knew it. He just hadn't figured out yet what was going to break first. His control, his friendship, or the carefully constructed lie the two of them were living inside together, close enough to touch, far enough apart to pretend it was still safe. 3 floors below him in the legitimate business wing of the Black Phoenix's operations building, Kang Seorin was reviewing the same photographs from her own copy of the envelope, with a glass of water at her elbow and a very specific kind of patience settled across her face. She was prepared to wait as long as it took. She had been waiting for years already. The question wasn't whether Do-hyun's marriage would crack. The question was only which fault line she would find first, his or the woman's. The envelope sat in Do-hyun's desk drawer for 11 days before he told Amara about it. He hadn't planned to tell her at all. His first instinct, the instinct that had kept him alive through a decade of syndicate politics, was containment. You don't show the other players what you know. You don't expose your vulnerabilities by naming them out loud. You absorb the pressure, you locate the source, and you dismantle it quietly and completely before the other side realizes the move has already been made. But Amara was not another player. She was his wife, technically, legally, on paper that was filed and stamped and cooling in a government office somewhere. And more than that, more than any legal document, she was the person sleeping 40 feet down the hallway from him every night, and she deserved to know she was being watched. He told her on a Sunday evening when she was at the kitchen counter grading her graduate students' lab reports, red pen in hand, reading glasses low on her nose, half a cup of cold tea at her elbow that she'd forgotten to drink. He set the envelope on the counter beside her work. She looked at it, looked at him, picked it up. She went through the photographs slowly, without rushing, the way she processed anything that mattered. Fully, front to back, giving each piece its due. Her face stayed even. The only thing that moved was the faint tightening at the corners of her mouth, barely visible. The kind of thing he only caught because he'd been reading her face for 23 years. She put the photographs back, set the envelope down flat on the counter. How long has she had someone inside? She asked. I don't know yet. Choi is pulling the logs. The courthouse photo was day 1. Yes. She was quiet for a moment, picked up her tea, realized it was cold, set it back down. So she planned this before your grandmother was even buried. Seorin plans everything before it's necessary. That's always been her method. Amara took off her reading glasses, set them on top of the lab reports. What does she actually want, Do-hyun? Not the estate, not the businesses. What does she actually want? He looked at her. To win. That's not a strategy. That's an emotion. For Seorin, they're the same thing. He pulled out the stool across from her and sat. She has spent her entire life watching this family treat her like a satellite. Capable enough to be useful, not important enough to matter. My grandmother gave her a title and a salary, and not 1 square inch of actual power. Seorin memorized that. She memorized all of it. And now she has a will that hands her everything if you fail. If I fail, he said, or if she makes me fail. The second option sat between them for a moment like something with weight. Amara looked at the envelope. She's going to come after me directly at some point. Yes. Not just surveillance, directly. Yes. She nodded slowly, jaw set, processing. He watched her do it, the particular way she absorbed hard information without flinching from it, without softening it into something easier to hold. It was one of the things he had always respected most about her, and it was also, at this specific moment, one of the most difficult things to sit across from. "Okay," she said. She put her glasses back on, pulled her lab reports back in front of her. "Tell Troy to also check if anyone on my lab building's visitor log looks irregular. She might have branched out." He stared at her for a second. "You're going back to grading. I have 8 of these left, and 2 of them are disasters." She picked up the red pen. "We can't stop living our lives because Seorin has an investigator somewhere. That's exactly what she wants." He didn't answer. He got up, went to the kitchen, poured out her cold tea, made a fresh cup, and set it beside her without saying anything. She didn't look up, but her hand found the cup 2 minutes later, automatically, and she drank it. He went back to his study and sat in the dark for a long time, thinking about what it meant that her first reaction to being surveilled was to tell him to check her lab for secondary threats, and that her second reaction was to keep grading papers, and that both of those things, the strategic clarity and the stubborn refusal to be derailed, were responses he had been watching her produce for most of his adult life. He was not going to examine what he was feeling about that. He was absolutely not going to do that. The family dinner happened on the 3rd Saturday of December. Not the one Do-hyun had refused, but the next one, which his mother had rescheduled with a phone call that contained no apology and no acknowledgement that the first invitation had been what it was. She had simply called, named a date, named a time, and said, "We expect you both." Which was as close as Park Sun-hee came to a concession, and Do-hyun understood this and brought Amara anyway, because the alternative was another refusal and another rescheduled date in an endless loop that achieved nothing. The Kang family home in Seongbuk-dong was a house that had never been warm despite its size. Large rooms, expensive furnishings, the particular kind of cleanliness that felt less like comfort and more like warning. Amara walked in beside Do-hyun with her back straight and her expression composed, wearing a deep burgundy dress that was elegant without being performative, and Do-hyun watched his mother's eyes move over her, quickly, assessingly, with the flat professional quality of someone pricing an object rather than greeting a person. "Amara," his mother said, "not a welcome, a placement." "Mrs. Kang," Amara said. Her voice was level. Dinner was a performance. 8 people at a long table with good china and expensive food and conversation that moved around Amara like water around a stone, never quite including her, never quite excluding her in a way that could be named directly. Do-hyun's father asked him about the logistics restructuring in Busan. His aunt talked about her daughter's new apartment. His mother guided the conversation with the smooth authority of a woman who had run family events for 30 years and knew exactly how to make someone invisible without leaving marks. Amara ate, listened, spoke when spoken to, which was rarely. She did not perform discomfort, and she did not perform ease. She simply existed at that table with the particular solidity of someone who has decided they are not going to be made smaller by a room. Seorin arrived late, which was a choice. She came in with a coat still on, apologized briefly to the room, kissed her aunt on the cheek, and sat down across from Amara with a smile that was warm and impenetrable. "You look wonderful," Seorin said to Amara. "That color is really striking on you." "Thank you," Amara said. "Are you finding the penthouse comfortable? I know it's very Do-hyun. A little cold, very structured." She laughed lightly. "He was always that way, even as a child, everything in exactly the right place." "It's comfortable," Amara said. "He makes good coffee." Something moved across Seorin's face. Barely anything, a fractional adjustment. And then the smile came back. "He does," she said. "I didn't know you knew that." "I've known him for 23 years, Amara said. "I know a lot of things." The table had gone slightly quiet around that exchange. Do-hyun felt it without looking, the particular quality of silence that means people are listening harder than they're pretending to. He didn't intervene. He watched his coffee cup and let Amara hold the ground she'd taken because she was holding it without help and didn't need any. And intervening would have made the exchange into a scene rather than what it was. A single clean point scored. Seorin moved on smoothly. That was the thing about her. She never overcommitted. She probed, found the resistance, and redirected, always with that faint smile that cost her nothing and revealed nothing. After dinner, when the men had moved to the sitting room and the kitchen was being cleared and Amara had excused herself to find the bathroom, Do-hyun found himself briefly alone with his mother in the hallway. "She's poised," his mother said. It was not a compliment. It was an observation delivered in the tone of someone noting a feature that didn't change their conclusion. "Yes," he said. "This family has a certain standing, Do-hyun. I know what standing this family has." "Then you understand that what you've done, the speed of it, the manner of it, She stopped, recalibrated. "Your grandmother's condition was not meant to be satisfied this way. You don't know what it was meant to be. She would have wanted—" "Grandmother is gone," he said, and his voice was quiet enough that she stopped. "What she would have wanted is no longer something you can use to tell me what to do. I need you to understand that clearly." His mother looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back toward the kitchen, posture unchanged, nothing in her bearing admitting that the exchange had happened. 2 days after the family dinner, Amar came home from the lab at 7 in the evening and said nothing about her day, which was unusual. She made herself food, ate it standing at the counter reading something on her tablet, and went to her room at 9. Do-hyun noticed. He filed it. He didn't ask. The second day she came home at 8, and the line of her shoulders when she walked through the door had a different quality, not distress exactly, but the specific tension of someone who has been managing something all day and is very tired of managing it. On the third day he was in the kitchen when she came in, and she set her bag down harder than necessary and stood at the counter with both hands flat on the surface, facing away from him, breathing. "Tell me," he said. She turned around. Her face was controlled, but the control was working harder than usual. "One of the department heads at the Research Institute pulled me aside today," she said. "He told me that there have been inquiries about me, about my work history, my funding sources, my—" She stopped, restarted. "Someone has been calling the Institute asking about whether my research position is legitimate or affiliated with external private funding. The implication being that maybe I'm on someone's payroll." The boss, his jaw tightened. "Seorin." "That's not something she could do through a law firm," Amara said. "That's personal. That's someone who knows which questions to ask to make an academic researcher's credibility look compromised. She's trying to establish that you have financial motive, but," he said, "that the marriage is transactional. If she can show that you're being compensated—" "I know what she's trying to establish." Her voice was flat. "I've spent 12 years building that reputation. 12 years of grant applications and peer reviews and fighting for funding in a field where I'm already twice the outsider in every room I walk into." She looked at him. "And she just needs a few phone calls to start unraveling it." He crossed the kitchen, stopped in front of her. "I'll shut it down." "How?" "I have resources." "Do-hyun." "Amara." He waited until she was looking at him directly. "I will shut it down. That is a promise." She held his gaze for a moment. Something in her face shifted. Not softening exactly, more like releasing pressure. She nodded. He made 3 calls that night from his study, with the door closed. The calls were brief and unambiguous, and by the following morning, the inquiries to the Research Institute had stopped. He didn't tell Amara the specifics of how, and she didn't ask, which was one of the unspoken accommodations they had built into their arrangement. The places where his world and her world required a door between them for everyone's comfort. But the damage of those days, the 3 days of her managing it quietly, the particular way she'd stood at that counter with her hands flat and her back to him, stayed with him. He found himself thinking about it at odd hours, during briefings, in the car. The image of her standing like that, absorbing something that had been directed at her specifically because of him, because of his family and his empire and his grandmother's will. January came cold and clear. They settled into the rhythms of shared living with the particular adaptive efficiency of 2 people who had known each other long enough that the logistics were easy, which made the other parts, the less practical parts, both better and worse simultaneously. He knew her schedule well enough to have coffee ready before she asked. She learned within 2 weeks exactly which notifications on his phone produced a specific quality of silence that meant he was managing something difficult and shouldn't be interrupted. They moved around each other in the apartment with a precision that had developed without discussion, two people occupying the same space with the practiced ease of long familiarity. The problem was that familiarity had a texture at close range that was different from what it had been across separate apartments and separate lives. At distance, it was simply warmth. The uncomplicated warmth of being known by someone, of mattering to a specific person in a way that required no performance. At close range, in the kitchen at 5:30 in the morning, or on the couch at 11 at night when they'd both been reading and the silence had gone completely comfortable, and the city outside was doing its slow, quiet breathing, at close range, it had weight, specific weight, the kind you felt in your chest without being able to name precisely what it was, or at least without being willing to name it. He was not willing to name it. He managed this by being exceptionally busy, which wasn't difficult because he had an empire to run and Seoran's campaign against them was generating constant operational demands. He managed it by treating every morning and every evening with the steady professionalism of a man who had decided something and was executing on that decision. He managed it by reminding himself in the clear light of every practical morning exactly what this arrangement was and exactly why she had entered it and exactly what it would mean to let himself forget those facts. He managed it almost completely. Except for the evenings. The evenings were harder. In February, Seoran made her next direct move. She came to the penthouse, not invited, not announced, arriving at the building reception with enough quiet authority that the desk staff called upstairs before refusing her, and Do Hyun, who had been expecting her to escalate and had not quite expected it in this form, told them to send her up. Amara was home. She was in the kitchen making dinner. Actual dinner, not takeout, because she cooked when she was in a certain kind of thinking mood, and Do-hyun had learned to recognize the signs. She was making jollof rice, something he had eaten at her family's table when they were teenagers, and had not thought about in years until the smell of it hit him the moment he opened the apartment door. She heard the elevator and came to the kitchen doorway and saw Seoran standing in the entryway with her coat on and her bag at her hip and that look on her face, the carefully arranged look, and something in Amar's expression simply went neutral. Completely neutral. Every temperature removed. "I'll leave you two alone," she said. "No," Do-hyun said, flat. "Stay." A slight pause. Then Amara leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely, and watched. Seoran looked between them. Whatever calculation she was running behind her eyes concluded quickly. She sat down on the couch without being invited and crossed her legs and set her bag on the cushion beside her with the ease of someone making themselves at home in a space they consider they have some claim to. "I wanted to talk to you both," she said. "Properly, without lawyers and without the family listening." "Then talk," Do-hyun said. She looked at Amara first. "I don't have anything against you personally," she said. "I want to be clear about that. This isn't about you." "Then who is it about?" Amara said. "It's about a family legacy that deserves to be held by someone who has actually paid into it." Seoran's voice was even, measured, not quite cruel enough to name itself as cruelty. Do-hyun has never cared about the legitimate businesses. He's run the organization, brilliantly, no one disputes that, but the companies my aunt spent 30 years building were never his priority. They were hers. And now they're about to pass to him through a marriage. She let a pause sit there. That has been in place for 3 months. The condition in the will doesn't specify how long the marriage has to exist before the marriage, Do-hyun said. Only how long it must continue after. Attorney Jong can recite that for you if you need it again. I know what the will says. Then what exactly is the point of this visit? Seoran looked at him. Then she looked at Amara. The look at Amara was longer, more specific, carrying something underneath it that was not warmth. "She's going to get hurt," Seoran said. "That's the point. Not by me. By this. By you." She said the last word looking at Do-hyun. "You don't keep people, Oppa. You keep distance. You always have. And when the 5 years are up, and the inheritance is secured and the contract has served its purpose..." She let the sentence sit unfinished. The room was quiet. Amara's arms were still crossed. Her face was still neutral. But something had changed in the set of her jaw, something very small, and Do-hyun saw it and felt it register in his own body with a precision that surprised him. "I think you should go," Amara said. Seoran looked at her. "I'm trying to help you." "No," Amara said. "You're trying to find the fault line. You've been trying to find it since November. You've called my institution, you've surveilled this apartment, you've planted things with the family, and now you're sitting on his couch trying the one angle you haven't tried yet, which is telling me the truth about something because you think I'm afraid of it. She unfolded her arms, stood straight. You can leave. A very long 3 seconds passed. Then Seorin stood, unhurried, picked up her bag, straightened her coat. She looked at Do Hyun, and her expression had not changed, but something behind it had sharpened. I'll see you at the board review in March, she said. Then she left. The elevator closed. The apartment was quiet. Do Hyun looked at Amara. She walked back into the kitchen without a word. He heard the sound of a spoon against a pot, the gas flame adjusting. He stood in the living room for a moment and then followed her. She was stirring the rice with her back to him. He could see the tension across her shoulders, the way she was holding them slightly too high, the way the stirring was slightly more controlled than the task required. Amara? Rice needs 5 more minutes, she said. Amara. I heard what she said. Her voice was even. Still that constructed evenness, the kind that cost something. I've heard it in different versions since November. From her, from your mother, from the way your family looks at me at every dinner we go to. I'm a temporary solution to a legal problem. I understand what this is. That isn't Do Hyun. She turned around. Her eyes were clear, not wet, not close to wet. She was not the kind of woman who cried in these moments, which he knew, but the clarity in them had a different quality than usual. Something stripped back. Don't. Please don't do the thing where you tell me what this isn't, because you don't know what it is either. That's the problem. That's actually the problem. He stood in her kitchen doorway and looked at her, and for a long moment he had no words, which was extraordinarily unusual for him, and the silence stretched between them with all the weight of every morning coffee and every evening hour and every careful boundary they had maintained between them for months. Then his phone rang. He looked at it. His head of security. He looked back at Amara. Take it, she said. She turned back to the stove. He took the call in the hallway. Choi's voice was controlled but tight. Sir, we identified the internal contact, the person passing information to Seorin's investigator. A pause. It's Park Jin-ho. Do-hyun went still. Park Jin-ho had been with the Black Phoenix for 11 years. He had been at Do-hyun's right hand through 3 syndicate crises and 2 police investigations. He had sat in on meetings that could have destroyed half the organization's senior leadership if they'd been recorded. He was not a peripheral contact. He was not a recent hire who could be dismissed as a miscalculation. He was family, in the way the syndicate understood that word. You're certain, Do-hyun said. The log access timestamps match his credentials on 4 separate dates. And there's a wire transfer to an account connected to one of Seorin's shell companies. $60,000, 2 weeks after the will was read. $60,000. The same number Amara had named in the kitchen the night she said yes. He didn't know if that was coincidence or if Seorin had been thorough enough to find out the specific number that would purchase exactly the loyalty she needed. He suspected it was the latter. Find out what he gave her, Do-hyun said. Everything. Every piece of information she has come from him. I want a list. Yes, sir. And Choi. His voice was very quiet. Don't move on him yet. I want to know everything she knows before she knows we know. He ended the call. He stood in the hallway of his apartment that was now their apartment, where Amara was in the kitchen and rice was on the stove, and Seorin had just sat on his couch and told the truth wrapped in a weapon. And the full weight of what was coming settled across his shoulders with the particular clarity of a threat that has stopped being hypothetical. Seorin had a man inside his organization. She had financial records, access logs, internal information on his operation that could do damage far beyond a will contest if it reached the wrong hands. And she had been building this since before his grandmother's body was cold. He had underestimated her timeline. That was the mistake. He had known she was moving. He had seen the photographs, blocked the institute inquiries, tracked the surveillance, but he had been thinking in months when Seorin had been thinking in years. He walked back to the kitchen doorway. Amara looked up from the stove. She read his face with the speed of 23 years of practice and set the spoon down. What happened? She said. There's a traitor in my organization, he said. Senior level. He's been feeding Seorin information since before the will was read. She was very still. How much does she have? I don't know yet, enough to be dangerous. He looked at her. Amara, this is going to get worse before it gets better. If you want to... Stop, she said. I'm serious. If you want to end this... I said stop. Her voice was not loud. It was the opposite of loud, compressed, precise, the voice of someone who has made a decision and does not intend to revisit it. I'm not going anywhere, so figure out your traitor problem and come eat dinner before it gets cold. He looked at her for a long moment. She picked up the spoon and went back to the rice, and the gas flame burned low and blue beneath the pot. And outside the window, Seoul was fully dark now, deep in the February night, indifferent as always to the specific weight of the things people carried inside it. He sat down at the kitchen island, and for the first time since November, in the middle of all of it, the surveillance and the family dinners and Seorin's visit and the traitor and everything that was coming, he felt something loosen very slightly in the center of his chest, which was, he knew, the most dangerous thing that had happened yet. Because loose was the beginning of open, and open, with Amara 3 feet away from him every night of his life, was something he was not prepared to survive. Park Jin-ho sat across from Do Hyun in the sub-level meeting room of the Black Phoenix's Mapo District Operations Building, a room with no windows, no recording equipment, and a table that had absorbed more difficult conversations than most courtrooms ever would. It was 7 in the morning. Jin-ho had been brought in at 6:15 by Choi and 2 others, without explanation, without warning, with only the specific quality of silence that experienced syndicate men learned to read correctly on the first reading. He had read it correctly. He sat with his hands on the table and his face arranged in the careful neutrality of a man who has already understood what this room means and is now running calculations behind his eyes at full speed. Do Hyun sat across from him and said nothing for a long time. This was a technique he had used for years. Not cruelty, practicality. Silence at the right moment costs the person across the table far more than any question, because their own mind fills it with everything they're afraid of. And by the time you speak, they've already half confessed to things you hadn't even thought to ask. Jin-ho lasted 4 minutes. Do-hyun-si, he said. Don't, Do-hyun said. His voice was quiet. It was always quieter when it was most serious. His men had learned that register over a decade, learned that the raised voice meant manageable anger, and the quiet voice meant something else entirely. Don't use my name like that. Don't put the respect in front of it right now. Jin-ho closed his mouth. $60,000, Do-hyun said, into an account connected to a shell company that Seorin has held through a Busan-based law firm since 2019. Wire originated from a personal account you opened in 2021 at a bank branch in Mapo. The transfer happened November 19th, 8 days after my grandmother's will was read. He paused. I have the documents in front of me. I have the access log showing your credentials on 4 separate dates. Pulling files you had no operational reason to be in. I have a phone record showing 12 calls to a number registered to a private investigation firm that Seorin retained in October. Another pause. I want you to tell me what you gave her. Not because I'm still finding out. I have most of it. I want you to tell me because I need to understand if there's anything you held back. Jin-ho's hands on the table were perfectly still. That was control. Not innocence. Control. The distinction was visible to anyone who knew what they were looking at. The financial audits, Jin-ho said finally. His voice was flat. The ones from the last 3 years on the legitimate side. The ones that show the cash flow structures between the organization's operational accounts and the business holdings. He stopped. Then, and the marriage registration documents. The timeline. The courthouse date. What else? A pause. Records from 2 board meetings where the succession structure was discussed, before your grandmother was sick, from 2021. Do-hyun looked at him for a long time. The thing moving in his chest was not anger. It was something that had been anger's neighbor for a long time and was now clarifying itself into something colder and more specific. 11 years, he said. I know. 11 years and 3 crises where what you knew could have put half this organization in prison. I know what I know. Jinho said. His voice was not defiant. It was tired, which was worse. I also know what I've never done with it. 11 years of knowing things I didn't use. Until November. Jinho looked at him directly for the first time. She came to me a year before your grandmother got sick. Not with money. She didn't lead with money. She led with the argument. She sat in front of me and she made the case that when your grandmother died and the succession question opened up, the organization needed someone at the top who understood what the legitimate side actually was, not as a cover, as a future. He stopped. She's not wrong about that, Do-hyun. The businesses your grandmother built, they're real, they're clean, and you have never once... Stop. The word came out level and final. Jinho stopped. You don't get to use her argument, Do-hyun said. You don't get to sit in this room and explain to me the ideology that you sold 11 years of loyalty for. I understand the argument. I understand it clearly. What I'm asking about is the choice. He stood up. What she has, the financial structures, the board records, can she use them to demonstrate that the marriage is fraudulent? The timeline helps her. Jinho's voice had gone flat again. The courthouse date against the will reading date. The speed of it. If she puts that in front of a family court petition alongside the financial records showing your grandmother's estate flows, she can build a picture of transactional intent. Can she prove it? A long pause. She can make it hard to disprove. Do-hyun walked to the door, put his hand on it, then without turning around, You'll be moved to the Incheon logistics office, non-operational, no access to anything above administrative level. Choi will manage the transition. He stopped. You're alive because of 11 years. Don't mistake that for forgiveness. He opened the door and walked out. The drive back to Gangnam took 25 minutes, and he spent all of them on the phone with attorney Jong, walking through the specific legal exposure created by what Jinho had given Seorin. Jong was thorough and careful and did not offer false reassurance, which Do-hyun valued above almost any other quality in an attorney. The picture that emerged by the time the car stopped was not catastrophic, but it was serious. Seorin had enough to file a challenge. Whether the challenge would succeed depended on evidence of genuine shared life. Evidence that was real, because the shared life was real, but evidence that required documentation and witnesses and the kind of verifiable detail that Do-hyun had been careful about, precisely because his instinct was always to leave fewer traces rather than more. He went upstairs. Amara was already gone. Her lab hours started at 8, and it was 8:40. The apartment had the particular quality it had when she'd left recently. Coffee still faintly warm in the press, her reading glasses on the counter where she kept forgetting them, the cardamom tea smell hanging in the kitchen air. He stood in the kitchen for a moment and then called her. She picked up on the second ring. How did it go? He confirmed it. She has the financial structures and the board records. A brief silence. How bad? Jong says she can file a challenge. It won't be automatic, but it will be costly and it will be visible. The family will see every piece of it. Okay. He could hear her moving. Footsteps, a door, the ambient sound of her lab shifting to something quieter. She'd stepped out. What does Jong need from us? Documentation. Evidence of genuine cohabitation. Shared finances. Shared decisions. Verified testimony from people who have seen us as a real couple. He paused on that last phrase. He also said... He stopped. Tell me. He said that if there's anything about the arrangement that we haven't disclosed to him, now is the time. Because Seorin will find it if it exists, and it's better managed before it becomes a weapon. The line was quiet for a moment. There's nothing to disclose, she said. The arrangement is what it is. We live together. We function as a couple. That's verifiable. Another pause. Is that what he was asking about? Yes, Do-hyun said, which was true. And also not entirely what had made him stop before saying it. They went through Jong's requirements methodically. The list of witnesses, the financial documentation, the records of shared expenses, and joint decisions that had been accumulating naturally since November. Amara was efficient and precise about it, treating it the way she treated any complex logistical problem, and by the time she had to get back to her lab, they had a working list that Jong could begin building into a defense structure. He hung up, made himself eat something. went to his study and worked through the afternoon with the focused, contained energy of a man who has identified the problem and is now executing on the solution. He did not think about the particular pause before she'd said there's nothing to disclose, or the way he'd said yes when the complete answer was more complicated than that. March arrived, and with it the board review that Seorin had mentioned on her way out of the apartment, which was a quarterly meeting of the Legitimate Business Holdings Advisory Board, the one body that had authority over the companies grandmother Kang had built, and that now sat in legal limbo pending the will's resolution. It was held in a glass-walled conference room on the 38th floor of the Kang Holdings building in central Seoul, with 9 board members, 2 external counsel, and the specific formal tension of a room full of people who are aware a power contest is happening around them and are calibrating their positions accordingly. Do-hyun came with Jong. Amara came with Do-hyun. Seorin was already seated when they arrived, positioned at the far end of the table with her own counsel to her left and a thin smile that she wore the way some people wear armor. She looked at Amara when they came in with an expression of such deliberate pleasantness that it communicated its own hostility more precisely than any open move could have. The meeting was procedural for its first hour: financial reviews, operational updates, a discussion of 2 acquisitions that had been pending since the previous year. Do-hyun sat through it with the patience of someone who has made his peace with a long game. Amara sat beside him and took notes on a legal pad, not because she needed to, but because having something to do with her hands in a room full of people who kept not quite looking at her directly was a form of armor she'd developed through years of being the only person in a room who looked like her. Then the external counsel raised the matter of the will conditions, and the room's temperature changed. Seorin's attorney, a sharp-faced man named Wu, who spoke in the clipped, precise rhythm of someone who charges by the word, presented the preliminary challenge framework. He was careful to frame it as a procedural concern rather than a personal one, speaking about the integrity of the succession process and the importance of ensuring the will's conditions were met in substance rather than form. He did not use the word fraud. He didn't need to. The framework he built pointed toward it from every angle, while leaving him technically clean. Jong responded with equal precision and equal care. The marriage was legal, documented, and continuous. The co-residence was verifiable. The financial integration was documented. Every formal requirement of the will's language had been satisfied and remained satisfied. Back and forth. Measured, careful, expensive language on both sides. And then Seorin leaned forward slightly and said, in a tone of quiet reasonableness that was among the most controlled acts of aggression Do-hyun had ever seen, "I'd like to ask Amara directly, if that's acceptable." The room went still. Do-hyun said nothing. He watched Seorin and kept his face empty. Amara looked at Seorin. "Go ahead," she said. "How did you and Do-hyun come to the decision to marry?" Seorin said. "In your own words. No preparation, just... how did it happen?" "We'd been close for 23 years, Amara said. When his grandmother passed and the question of what came next arose, we were honest with each other about what we wanted. Getting married was a decision we made together." "When did you realize you wanted to marry him?" "I've wanted to be in his life for 23 years, Amara said. The form that took changed. Seorin held her gaze for a moment. And the timing, 10 days after the will was read, that wasn't motivated by the will's conditions. The timing was motivated by not wanting to wait any longer, Amara said. Very good, Do-hyun thought. Every word technically accurate. Every word constructed with the precision of someone who had understood from the beginning that this moment was coming. Seorin looked at her for 3 seconds longer than was comfortable. Then she sat back. "Thank you," she said. And the pleasantness in her voice had the specific quality of someone who has just confirmed something they needed to confirm. The meeting ended at 4. They rode the elevator down in silence, Jeong beside them, and it wasn't until they were outside on the street in the raw March air that Amara said quietly to Do-hyun, "She already has something else. That wasn't a fishing expedition. She was checking something she already knows." "I know," he said. "What is it?" "I don't know yet." She looked at him. He looked back. And the thing he couldn't say, the thing that would have answered a different question than the one she'd asked, stayed where it had been living for months, in the place where his control was thickest and his honesty was most carefully managed. The answer came 3 weeks later, and it came for Amara first, which was the part he hadn't predicted. Not the content, but the direction. She came home on a Thursday evening in late March, and he knew from the sound of the door that something had happened. Not the weight of the door or the speed of it, but the specific quality of quiet that followed it. Too controlled, too intentional, the quiet of someone who has made a decision about how they are going to walk through the next few minutes. She put her bag on the counter, didn't take off her coat, stood at the kitchen island with her back to him and her hands at her sides. "Sioran came to my lab today," she said. He set down what he was holding. She didn't come inside. She was in the corridor when I came out of my afternoon seminar. She was alone. No lawyers, no investigators. Amara turned around. Her face was the most stripped back he had seen it. Not distressed, not angry. Something underneath both of those, something that had been building for months and had now arrived at a specific point of clarification. She showed me photographs. His jaw tightened. Of what? Of you. A pause. Meeting a woman. 3 separate occasions. A hotel in Itaewon, a cafe in Yongsan, a private car park in Mapo. She met his eyes directly. An elegant woman, Korean, late 30s, early 40s, well-dressed. The photographs go back to January. The room was very quiet. Do-hyun felt the specific quality of this moment. Felt it with the precision of a man who understood the difference between a situation that could be controlled and a situation that required something else entirely. His first instinct was to manage it, explain it cleanly, handle it efficiently, restore the operational stability of their arrangement. That instinct lasted approximately 2 seconds before something else moved through him, something older and less manageable. And he recognized that this was the moment he had been preventing for 4 months with enormous discipline, and it had arrived anyway. "She's not my lover," he said. Amar's expression did not change. Then who is she? The question hung between them. He could see in her face that she was holding herself with everything she had, that the evenness she was producing was costing her in a way she was not going to let him see, and that she had made a decision somewhere in the corridor outside her seminar room that she was going to ask this question and receive the answer standing up, without flinching, regardless of what it was. That was the moment it became impossible to manage. "Her name is Dr. Shin Eun-ji," he said. "She's a psychotherapist. I've been seeing her since January." The silence that followed was different from the ones before it. Amara's chest moved. One slightly deeper breath contained immediately. Her eyes stayed on his. "Why?" she said. He looked at her. The word came from somewhere he hadn't accessed in a long time, from underneath the 11 years of discipline and the organization and the apartment and the 5:30 coffee and all the careful distance. It came out of the place where his control was thinnest, and the truth was stored in its least manageable form. "Because I couldn't keep pretending," he said. She waited. "I have been—" He stopped. Restarted. His voice was still level, but the levelness was different now. Not constructed, just what was left when the construction was taken away. "For 4 months, I have been living 3 feet from you and managing something that I have been managing for a very long time, Amara. Since before this apartment, since before the will, since—" He stopped again. His jaw tightened. "I started seeing Eun-ji because I was not coping with what it was costing me to be in this apartment every day and pretend that it wasn't costing me anything. The room was absolutely still. "I have been in love with you," he said, "for a very long time. That is not something that happened because of the marriage. The marriage happened because of it. Because when I needed someone I trusted completely and the clock was running, you were the only person my mind went to. Not because of practicality, not because of the history." He met her eyes. "Because you are the only person in my life who I have ever wanted in a way that I could not organize and could not manage and could not control. And I have been controlling it for 13 years because I was not willing to risk you." He stopped. His hands at his sides were very still. Amara had not moved. Her face had... Something in it had changed, cracked open, an expression moving underneath the composure that was the most undisguised thing he had ever seen on her face in 23 years. "Do-hyun," she said. Her voice was barely above normal volume. It had a texture in it that he had never heard before. "You don't have to say anything," he said immediately. I'm not. I have been in love with you since I was 21 years old. The sentence arrived in the room and sat there. He looked at her. She looked at him. I said yes to this marriage, she said slowly, because I have been looking for a reason to say yes to you for 13 years, and this was the first one you gave me. Her voice was still even, but the evenness now was not constructed. It was the evenness of someone speaking from a place where there is nothing left to perform. I moved into this apartment knowing exactly what it was going to cost me, and I did it anyway, every morning, every evening, every dinner where your family looked at me like I was a problem to be processed. I did all of it because being near you was the best and the worst possible version of what I wanted. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and she didn't move back, and he stopped directly in front of her with less than a foot between them, which was the closest they had stood since November. And the quality of that proximity at close range was nothing like 4 months of managed distance. It was everything that had been building for 4 months and for 13 years before that. And it was enormous, and it was very specific, and it had exactly nowhere left to be managed. 13 years, he said. 13 years, she said. He put his hand on the side of her face, not asking, not tentative, the way a man touches something he has wanted for so long that when he finally reaches it, the movement comes out completely certain. She closed her eyes. And the breath she released was the most honest thing he had heard in 4 months of shared living, which was saying something because she had been honest with him in ways that had cost her considerably. When he kissed her, it was nothing like the managed, organized, controlled version of himself that he had been presenting to the world for the better part of 4 months. It was the version underneath all of that, the one that his therapist had been trying to help him locate for 2 months, the one that apparently only Amara had ever been capable of reaching. They stood in the kitchen with the March dark outside and the city doing its indifferent breathing below. And what happened in the next few minutes was not dramatic in the way of syndicate crises and board meetings and legal challenges. It was the quiet, irreversible drama of 2 people finally stopping. Later, much later, the city fully dark, takeout containers on the counter because neither of them had cooked. Amara was sitting on the couch with her knees pulled up and Do-hyun was beside her, and the quality of the silence between them had changed completely, fundamentally. The absence of performance in it was so total that it felt almost physical, like a pressure change. Seorn is going to push harder now, Amara said. Yes. She came to my lab specifically to destabilize you through me. She expected me to confront you and for the confrontation to damage something. It didn't, he said. No. She looked at him sidelong. Something in her expression was still adjusting, recalibrating around the new shape of the evening, the new shape of what they were. But she doesn't know that yet. She's waiting to see the damage. Then we don't show her damage, he said. We show her the opposite. Amara was quiet for a moment. The board challenge goes to family court in May. That's 7 weeks. 7 weeks, he said. You need to bring your people into alignment before then. Anyone Seorn might still reach. I know. And your parents. She paused. Your mother is the variable I'm most concerned about. If Seorn gets to her before May, my mother will follow evidence of stability, he said. That's all she has ever respected. We give her that. Amara nodded slowly, then quietly. What did Unji say when you told her about me? He looked at her. She said that the things we won't say to the people we love cost us more than anything else we carry. Amara absorbed that. She's not wrong. No, he said. She isn't. They sat in the changed apartment for a while longer, and Do-hyun was aware, with the clarity of a man who had spent a decade reading threats accurately, that what had shifted tonight was not just the space between the two of them. The entire shape of the conflict had shifted. Seorn had sent those photographs to Amara expecting to detonate something. Instead, she had detonated the one thing that had been keeping Do-hyun at half capacity for 4 months, the management of his own feelings, the energy that had been going into distance rather than direction. That energy was now free, which meant Seorn had made a mistake, not a small one. His phone lit up on the coffee table. He glanced at it. A message from Choi. Soren's attorney filed a preliminary notice with the family court this afternoon. Hearing date requested for April 14th, 3 weeks earlier than May. She was accelerating. He showed Amara the message. She read it. Her face settled into an expression he recognized. Not fear, not even quite determination, something more specific than both. The expression of a scientist who has just received a result that changes the parameters and is already reconfiguring. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks, he said. Then we have 3 weeks to make this airtight. She stood up, took both takeout containers to the kitchen, moved with the forward, certain quality she had when she had already decided something. Call Jong first thing tomorrow. I want to go through everything he has. Amara. She stopped, turned. He looked at her across the kitchen, across the apartment that had become their apartment, with the cardamom tea smell and the reading glasses on the counter and 13 years of everything that had finally been said. Whatever Seorin brings to that hearing, he said, it isn't going to be enough. She held his gaze for a moment, then, no, she said, it isn't. But 3 floors down in the parking structure beneath the building, where Seorin's car had been sitting for the past 40 minutes in a spot with clear visibility to the lobby entrance, her investigator was looking at a photograph taken through a telephoto lens of a kitchen window on the 42nd floor. 2 figures, proximity unmistakable. The specific geometry of the moment before a kiss captured in a frame that was absolutely clear. Soren looked at the photograph. Then she looked at the preliminary filing notice on her phone, which her attorney had sent at 4 that afternoon. Move the hearing, she said. Call Wu tonight. I want the April 14th date confirmed, and I want a subpoena for the Research Institute's employment records by end of week. Her driver glanced at her in the mirror. Is there a problem? No, she said, and she was almost telling the truth, because what she had seen in that photograph was not the damage she had expected to cause. It was something else, something she had not accounted for. There's a complication. She set the phone down and looked out at the parking structure's concrete dark. The complication was simple, and it was fatal to the version of her strategy that had assumed the marriage was only ever a contract. They weren't pretending anymore. Which meant she needed something else entirely. Something that no photograph of a shared kitchen moment could dismantle. Something that went to the legal foundation rather than the emotional surface. She had been holding it back, saving it. The document in her bag, the one her attorney had been advising her not to use yet, the one that Jinho had provided in his very first meeting with her investigator 14 months ago, before anyone knew the grandmother was dying, was a record of a conversation between Do Hyeon and his grandmother from 2022. A recorded conversation, legal under the single-party consent rules that applied in the jurisdiction where it had taken place, in which Do Hyun had said, clearly, unambiguously, in his own voice, that he had no intention of marrying, that he considered marriage incompatible with the life he led, and that his grandmother should not include any succession conditions related to marriage in her estate planning because he would not comply with them. His own words, his own voice, saying he would never do exactly what he had done. In a family court hearing focused on intent and authenticity, that recording was not a complication. That recording was the end of everything he had built in the past 4 months. Jung called at 6:45 in the morning. Do-hyun was already awake. Had been awake since 5, lying in the dark with Amara's breathing beside him and the city beginning its slow gray reassembly outside the window, running through the hearing variables with the methodical focus of a man who had learned to use sleeplessness productively. When the phone lit up, he was out of bed and in the hallway before the second ring, pulling the door closed behind him with the particular care of someone who has recently learned the value of the person sleeping on the other side of it. Talk, he said. Seorn's attorney filed an amended challenge at 11:15 last night. Jong's voice had the specific texture of a man who had been awake for most of those intervening hours. They've added a new evidentiary item, an audio recording. I have the filing summary, but not the recording itself. We'll get disclosure today, before the hearing. Do Hyeon. A pause that had weight in it. The filing describes it as a recorded conversation between you and your grandmother, 2022, in which you explicitly state opposition to a marriage condition in her estate planning. The hallway was very quiet. How long is the recording? Do-hyun said. The filing doesn't specify, but Wu attached a partial transcript. 4 exchanges. Your voice confirmed by the filing as authenticated by a third-party audio analyst they retained privately. Another pause. It's real. That's my read before I've even heard it. Wu wouldn't file it if there was any question. Do-hyun leaned his back against the hallway wall, looked at the ceiling. His chest was doing something he didn't have a clean word for. Not panic, because he had never in his adult life produced panic, but the adjacent thing, the physiological predecessor to it, the place where the body registers what the mind is still processing. Jinho? He said. That would be my assumption as well. The timing of access, it was in the grandmother's private records. She kept recordings of significant conversations going back 20 years. Jinho knew where she kept them. He had access to the family archive through the estate administration in 2021 when the inventory was done after her first hospitalization. He pushed off the wall. Seorin has been holding it. She filed it last night because she saw the photographs. What photographs? From last night. Someone was outside the building. He was already moving toward his study. She saw what happened and she recalibrated. She knows the emotional argument isn't going to work anymore, so she's going to the legal foundation. That's exactly what she's doing, Zhang said. The recording, if it says what the transcript excerpt suggests, puts your stated intent directly in conflict with the marriage. A family court examining good faith compliance with a will condition is going to want to reconcile the two. At minimum, it creates doubt. At maximum, it invalidates, Do-hyun said. Yes. He sat down at his desk. The study was dark, lit only by the city light coming through the window. He didn't turn the lamp on. What do we have? Everything we've been building since January. Shared residence, verified. Joint finances, documented. Social witnesses. 8 people who have seen you together in genuine capacity, not performed. The Institute confirmed Amar's relocation of certain research files to the home address, which establishes continuous habitation with professional integration. Zhang paused. And I have the therapist, Dr. Shin. She called me this morning. She said she wants to testify. Do-hyun went still. Unji. She said, and I'm quoting her notes here, that she has direct professional knowledge of the psychological reality of Do-hyun's emotional state over the past 3 months, and that it is categorically inconsistent with a transactional arrangement. A brief pause. She's willing to waive privilege because her client has consented and because she believes the recording will be misrepresented without clinical context. He sat with that for a moment. Unji, who had sat across from him every week since January in a quiet office in Yongsan and listened to him describe the specific torture of loving someone he was pretending not to love, was prepared to walk into a courtroom and say so. Tell her yes, he said. And Zhang, I know, Zhang said. I'll have a counterfiling ready before the 10 o'clock session opens. Whatever it costs. I know that too. He ended the call. He sat in the dark for exactly 3 minutes. He was aware of the duration, counted it without meaning to. And then he got up and went back to the bedroom and stood in the doorway. Amara was awake. She was lying on her back looking at the ceiling with her hands folded on her stomach, and when he appeared in the doorway, she turned her head and looked at him and said nothing, waiting. She has a recording, he said. A conversation between me and my grandmother from 2022. In it, I told her I would never comply with a marriage condition. Amara held his gaze. Did you say that? Yes. In those words. Close enough that the distinction won't help us. She was quiet for a moment. Then she sat up. Tell me everything Zhang said. He did. She listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting, processing rather than reacting. When he finished, she got out of bed and went to the window and stood there in the early light in bare feet, with her arms crossed, looking at the city. She's been holding it since Jinho gave it to her, Amara said. 14 months, probably. And she used it now because last night changed the calculus. She turned around. She knows we're real. She saw it. So the emotional attack won't work, and she went to the structural one. Her jaw was set. She's smart. Yes, so we have to be smarter. She looked at him directly. The recording says what you said in 2022, before your grandmother died, before the will was read, before anything about this. She gestured between them, indicating the apartment, the changed air of it, the 13 years of finally said things, became what it is now. She stopped. Do-hyun, people change. That's not a legal defense, that's a fact. And we have evidence of the change. Unji is willing to testify. Something moved across Amara's face. Not surprise, exactly. Something that recognized the weight of that offer. She stopped. That's a significant thing for her to do. She believes in the case. She believes in you, Amara said. Which is different. A pause. What else do we have? Zhang has 8 witnesses. The documentation, the financial records going back to November, the residence verification. He looked at her. And there's one more thing. She waited. You, he said. Zhang wants you to speak. In your own words, in that room, without preparation. Or rather, with only your own knowledge as preparation. Because the one thing Sioran cannot fabricate or counter is 23 years of knowing me in a way that no investigator's file can replicate. Amara absorbed that. She'll have Wu cross-examine me. Yes. He's good. You're better. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she unfolded her arms and went to get dressed, and the conversation was over in the way that Amara ended conversations when a decision had been made and further discussion was just noise. The family court building on Seo Chodero was a structure of functional severity. Wide corridors, fluorescent light, the ambient pressure of accumulated human conflict absorbed into its walls over decades. Do-hyun and Amara arrived at 9:40 with Jiang and 2 associates, and the walk from the parking structure to the elevator had the specific quality of movement towards something that cannot be avoided, every step deliberate, nothing wasted. Sioran was in the corridor outside the hearing room with Wu and 2 members of her own team. She was wearing dark navy, composed as always, and she watched Do-hyun and Amara come down the corridor with an expression that was perfectly calibrated, not triumphant, which would have been premature and was not her style, but settled. The expression of someone who believes the ground is prepared and is waiting for the structure to stand on it. Do-hyun looked at her as he passed. He didn't slow down. She said quietly to his profile, "You should have talked to me in November." He stopped. Amar kept walking 2 more steps and then stopped too, half a pace ahead of him, not turning. He turned to look at Sioran. "I'm talking to you now," he said. "In a courthouse," she said. "That's not talking. That's losing slowly. You've been planning this for 14 months, he said. You bought a man's loyalty for $60,000. You called my wife's institution. You had someone sitting outside our building with a camera at 10 o'clock at night." His voice was quiet, perfectly level. The register his organization had learned to be most careful around. "You have spent over a year making sure that what my grandmother built would transfer to you if I failed. I want to be clear that I understand the amount of work that represents." Sioran held his gaze without moving. "And I want you to understand," he said, "that it was not enough." He turned and walked into the hearing room. The room was smaller than a standard courtroom, a family court hearing room, rectangular, with a judge's bench and 2 counsel tables and a witness area and seating for a limited number of observers. The family had been notified as required. His parents were seated in the 3rd row, his father with the rigid posture, his mother with her hands folded in her lap, her face carrying the particular expression of a woman who has decided to wait before deciding what she thinks. Several board members were present. 2 of his senior lieutenants sat in the back because this hearing was not separate from the organization's interests, and everyone in the room understood that. Judge Kwan Mirai was 62, efficient, and had the eyes of someone who had heard every possible version of every possible family dispute and could identify the essential core of a situation within minutes. She entered without ceremony, reviewed her notes, and opened the session with the directness of someone who does not bill by the hour and has no reason to waste time. Wu presented first. He was precise and methodical, and constructed his argument the way good attorneys construct arguments, from foundation up, not from conclusion back. He established the timeline. Will reading, marriage registration, 10 days elapsed. He established the financial relationship, Amara's mother's treatment costs, the coincidence of timing, the verifiable financial pressure. He established the prior record, Do-hyun's history of solitary living, his documented professional ethos of keeping personal life strictly separated from organizational function, his reputation, verifiable through multiple witness accounts, for relationships that were deliberately transient and deliberately compartmentalized. Then he played the recording. The room got very still. Do-hyun's voice came out of the speakers, his own voice, recognizable, clear, the voice of a man 2 years younger who had sat across from his grandmother in her apartment and spoken with the conviction of someone who believed completely in what he was saying. "할머니, I understand why you're thinking about this. I know what you want for me. But a marriage condition is not something I'll comply with. I need you to hear that clearly so you don't build it into the document. I don't live that way, and I won't start. Not for the estate, and not for anything else. His grandmother's voice, then slightly more distant from the recording device. Do hyon ah. What people say they will not do and what they end up doing are not always the same thing. And his own voice again, final, certain. In this case, they are. The recording ended. The room was quiet for 3 full seconds. Judge Kwan made a note, did not look up. Wu said, carefully, into the silence, the petitioner submits that the respondent's stated position, expressed directly to the decedent, establishes that the marriage entered into in November was not undertaken in good faith compliance with the will's conditions, but in calculated legal response to them, with the specific intent of satisfying the letter of the requirement while violating its spirit. Zhang rose. The respondent will address the recording directly and in full. We request that the court allow contextual testimony before reaching any assessment of the recording's implication. Judge Kwan said, granted, call your first witness. Zhang called Dr. Shin Unji. She entered the room with the unhurried composure of someone who has spent years sitting in rooms where things are very difficult and has made peace with that occupation. She was 40, precisely dressed, and she sat in the witness area with her hands in her lap and looked at Judge Kwan directly. Zhang was brief and targeted. Professional relationship established, duration established, relevant disclosure consent established. Then, in your professional assessment, over the course of your sessions with the respondent beginning in January of this year, what was the psychological reality of his relationship with the petitioner, his wife? Wu objected. Privilege. Zhang cited the signed disclosure consent. Judge Kwan overruled. Unji said, the respondent presented with a specific and consistent pattern of emotional suppression in relation to his wife. Not suppression of indifference, the opposite. He was managing active, significant, long-term attachment that he had not permitted himself to express. The distress that brought him to seek help was not the stress of maintaining a fraudulent arrangement. It was the distress of living in daily proximity to someone he loved and believing he could not say so. Wu cross-examined. He was sharp, tried to establish that the patient was performing distress, that the therapeutic relationship could be manipulated, that professional assessment based on self-report was inherently unverifiable. Unji answered every question with the measured precision of someone who has prepared for exactly this type of challenge and is not remotely rattled by it. Then Zhang called Amara. She walked to the witness area and sat down and looked at Judge Kwan with the same directness she brought to every room she walked into, and Do Hyon, watching her from the counsel table, felt something in his chest that was not legal strategy, and was not operational calculation, and was not anything he could have named in the syndicate's vocabulary. Zhang said, Ms. Brooks, how long have you known the respondent? 23 years, Amara said. And when did you understand that your relationship with him had moved beyond friendship? She was quiet for one moment, not hesitating. Locating. 13 years ago, she said. When I was 21. I understood it clearly then, and I didn't say anything, and neither did he, and we spent 13 years not saying it because we were both afraid of what it would cost. She looked at Zhang and then at the judge. I moved into that apartment knowing it was a legal arrangement and knowing it was the closest I was ever going to get to what I actually wanted. I weighed that and I said yes anyway. That is the truth of my intent. Wu cross-examined with the efficiency of a surgeon, the financial pressure, the treatment costs, the coincidence of the $60,000 figure. He laid it out cleanly, without aggression, which was more effective than aggression because it gave the facts room to speak without the noise of hostility. Is it accurate, Wu said, that your mother's treatment enrollment required approximately $60,000 at the point of the marriage? Yes, Amara said, and the respondent had the means to provide that. Yes. And he did provide it. He offered. I didn't take it immediately. But you did take it eventually. A pause. Yes. So there was a financial transfer from the respondent to you related to costs your family faced, concurrent with the marriage. That's a technically accurate description of something more complicated. I'm asking about the transaction, not the complexity, Wu said. The transfer happened. The transfer happened, Amara said. Wu looked at the judge. The petitioner submits that the respondent's prior stated intent, combined with the documented financial relationship, establishes a transactional rather than genuine basis. One more question, Amara said. Wu stopped, looked at her. That was not how cross-examination worked, and he was clearly deciding how to respond. Judge Kwan said, "You'll have the opportunity to address additional matters through respondent's counsel, Ms. Brooks." "I understand," Amara said. She looked at the judge. "But there's something I'd like to say that speaks directly to the transaction question, and I think the court should have it before counsel's summary." Judge Kwan considered this for a moment. "Go ahead." Amara's hands were in her lap. Her back was straight. She spoke the way she spoke in academic seminars when she was presenting something she had worked on for a long time, with the specific authority of a person who knows exactly what they know and does not need anyone else's confirmation of it. "The financial transfer happened because Do-hyun found out my mother needed treatment, and he gave me the money before I finished the sentence. Not because we were married, not because it was part of an arrangement, because in 23 years, every single time something in my life has been in danger, career, family, health, safety, he has been the first person to move toward it, not as a transaction, as a fact of who he is." She stopped. "Seorin is asking this court to look at the evidence of our life together and find a contract in it. What the evidence shows is a person who has been taking care of me in 100 small ways since we were 11 years old. The marriage didn't create that. The marriage is that. It's just the version of it that finally had a name." The room was very quiet. Judge Kwan wrote something. The scratch of her pen was the only sound for a full 5 seconds. Wu regrouped with the speed of an experienced attorney and pivoted back to the recording, played a section of it again, let Do-hyun's own voice fill the room with its certainty, its deliberate closure. He was rebuilding the argument from its strongest point, which was the right move, and Do-hyun recognized the quality of it even as it landed against his ribs like something blunt. Then Jong called Do-hyun. He walked to the witness area and sat down, and the room looked at him with all the particular attention that rooms give to the person who is the center of a contested thing, and he let it look. He had been looked at in difficult rooms for a long time. Jung said, "The recording we heard, in which you told your grandmother you would not comply with a marriage condition. Did you say those words?" "Yes," Do-hyun said. "Did you mean them at the time?" "Yes." "What changed?" He looked at Amara. She was in the second row of seating now, having returned to her chair after testimony, and she was looking at him with an expression he had learned in the past few weeks, the one that was not performed, not managed, the direct version of her that had always been the most difficult and most necessary thing in his life. She said yes, he said, and I understood for the first time that I had been making a decision on behalf of both of us without consulting the other person involved. I had decided that loving her was incompatible with keeping her, and I had never asked her if that was her conclusion too. He looked at Judge Kwan. The recording reflects what I believed in 2022. What I believed was wrong. Not because circumstances changed, because I was wrong. People can be wrong about themselves. I was wrong about myself for 13 years. Wu cross-examined with the recording again. Asked Do-hyun to reconcile the certainty in his own voice with the claim of genuine evolution. Do-hyun answered every version of the question the same way, with the flat, absolute honesty of a man who has run out of reasons to manage his own truth in a public room. Then Wu said, "How do you ask this court to believe that the change you describe is genuine rather than manufactured for the purpose of this hearing?" Do-hyun said, "I don't ask the court to believe anything. I ask the court to look at the evidence of 5 months of a shared life and draw its own conclusion. I am not asking for faith. I am asking for what is already documented." Wu turned away. "Nothing further." Judge Kwan called a 30-minute recess. In the corridor outside, Do-hyun stood with Amara against the far wall, away from the Seorin contingent, and neither of them spoke for the first 2 minutes of the break. His shoulder was against the wall. Her shoulder was against his. The physical proximity was not performed, was nothing like the careful managed proximity of November and December and January. It was simply where they were. "The judge took a lot of notes," Amara said. "She always does. Jong says she's thorough." Who's going to come back in that room and ask for a continuance to obtain additional evidence? Probably. And Zhang is going to argue that the evidentiary record is complete and that a continuance would cause undue burden. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Do Hyun, the recording is still the problem. Wu's right that it's the strongest piece she has. Everything else can be countered, but your own voice saying, I know. So what do we do with it? He looked down the corridor. Seorin was 40 feet away with Wu, speaking in low tones, and the set of her shoulders was different from what it had been that morning, tighter, more controlled, the posture of someone in the process of recalculating. There's one thing Zhang hasn't used yet, Do-hyun said. What? My grandmother's voice. On that same recording. He looked at Amara. She said, what people say they will not do and what they end up doing are not always the same thing. She heard everything I said, and she still wrote the condition into the will. She heard me say I would never comply, and she built the condition anyway, because she knew. Amara went still. She knew you were wrong about yourself. She knew what I wouldn't let myself know. He turned to face her fully. The condition wasn't a test of my obedience. It wasn't a punishment or a prize. It was a structure she built specifically because she understood that without an external reason to cross the distance, I never would. He paused. My grandmother heard me say I would never marry, and she rewrote her will to give me a reason to. That recording doesn't prove the marriage is fraudulent. That recording is evidence of exactly what she intended. Amara looked at him for a long moment. Something moved across her face. The recalibration of someone encountering a piece of information that reorganizes the meaning of everything around it. Zhang needs to hear this before we go back in, she said. They were already moving. Zhang listened to it in under 90 seconds in the corridor alcove by the water fountain, and the expression on his face when Do-hyun finished went from concentrated to something approaching decisive. He pulled out his phone and made a note. The recording works both ways, he said. The grandmother's response, her voice, in the same recording, expressing the direct inverse of certainty about your stated position, can be used to establish that the testator herself did not accept your statement as final, which goes to intent of the condition. He was already typing. I need 2 minutes. He stepped away. Amara stood beside Do-hyun in the corridor with the institutional fluorescent light overhead and the sound of other cases moving through other rooms down the hall, and she put her hand against his forearm, not dramatically, not with statement, just the particular kind of contact that says, I am here, and I know where we are, and we are not separate in this. He put his hand over hers. Down the corridor, Seorin looked over and saw them standing like that, and something in her face changed. A fractional shift, barely visible. The first thing he had seen in her expression in 5 months that was not entirely controlled. The recess ended. They filed back in. Judge Kwan took her seat, looked at her notes, then looked up with the focused attention of someone who has processed what has been presented and has arrived at the threshold of a decision. Wu rose before Zhang could. Your Honor, the petitioner requests a brief continuance to allow. I've reviewed the evidentiary record, Judge Kwan said. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. I have a question before we proceed to summaries. Wu sat down. The judge looked at Seorin directly. Ms. Kang, the recording you submitted say the full recording, not the excerpt filed with the amended challenge. Have you submitted the complete audio to the court? A pause. Wu and Seorin exchanged a fraction of a glance. The excerpt represents the relevant portion, Wu said carefully. I'd like the complete audio submitted, Judge Kwan said, before summaries. You have 15 minutes. Another pause. Longer. Your Honor, the petitioner submits that 15 minutes, Counselor Wu, Judge Kwan said, and turned to her notes. The blood left Seorin's face in a way that was subtle enough that most of the room missed it. Do-hyun did not miss it. He watched the color change, watched the precise recalibration behind her eyes, and understood what it meant. The complete recording contained the grandmother's response, and Seorin had known that, and had submitted only the excerpt precisely because the grandmother's words in the same recording dismantled the argument the excerpt was being used to make. She had known. She had filed it anyway, betting that the excerpt alone would be enough, betting that no one would ask for the rest. Judge Kwan had asked for the rest. 15 minutes. Do-hyun sat at the council table and looked at his hands on the surface in front of him and breathed slowly and deliberately and waited for the rest of it to fall. The 15 minutes passed the way certain kinds of time pass. Not quickly, not slowly, but with the specific density of minutes that contain a great deal of consequence per second. Woo spent 12 of them in the corridor with Seorin and a phone pressed to his ear, speaking to someone Do-hyun couldn't hear through the hearing room's closed door. Jong spent the same 12 minutes at the council table with his laptop open and his two associates working beside him, pulling the thread of the grandmother's recorded response into a formal supplemental argument with the focused efficiency of people who understand that a window has opened and will not stay open long. Amara sat beside Do-hyun and did not speak and did not need to. When Woo and Seorin returned to the room at the end of the 15 minutes, Seorin's composure was intact. It was always intact. But the quality of it had changed. What had been settled that morning was now constructed, and the difference between those two things was visible if you knew where to look. And Do-hyun had spent 34 years learning exactly where to look. Woo submitted the complete audio. Judge Kwan's clerk played it from the beginning. Do-hyun's voice again, filling the room with the certainty of 2 years ago. The flat refusal, the deliberate closure, the man who had decided something about himself and was stating it as architecture rather than preference. Then the pause. Then his grandmother's voice, unhurried, without argument, with the specific quality of patience that belongs to people who have decided to wait for the world to catch up to what they already know. Do-hyun, ah. What people say they will not do and what they end up doing are not always the same thing. And then, after his own voice had come back with its final certainty, in this case they are, his grandmother had said something the excerpt had cut, something that the filing had omitted with the precision of surgical removal. Her voice, clear in the room, then I will write it anyway, because I am not writing it for the man you are today. I am writing it for the man you will be when you finally stop being afraid. The recording ended. The room absorbed it. Judge Kwan did not write anything for a long moment. She looked at the speaker on the clerk's table as though the voice was still there, still present, as though the woman who had spoken those words had said something that deserved a moment of genuine consideration before anyone moved on. Then she looked at Seorin, not at Woo. At Seorin directly, in the particular way that judges look at parties rather than counsel when they want the party to feel the weight of what is being seen. Seorin met the look, did not look away. That, Do-hyun thought, was the truest thing about her. She would not flinch, not even now. Whatever else she was not a coward. Woo began his summary with the composure of a man rebuilding a structural argument on the fly while appearing not to be doing so. He was skilled enough that the rebuilt version was coherent. He pivoted from the recording as evidence of stated intent to the recording as evidence of a pattern of family pressure, suggesting that the grandmother's response itself demonstrated a history of coercive expectation that colored the legitimacy of the will's condition. It was a stretch, and everyone in the room with legal training knew it was a stretch, but it was an honest attempt to do the best available thing with a piece of evidence that had just been turned inside out. Jong's summary was calm and direct, and devastating in the particular way that calm, direct things are devastating when they follow something overwrought. The grandmother had heard the respondent's position. She had understood it completely. She had written the condition anyway, not against his wishes, but in full knowledge of them, because her understanding of her grandson exceeded his understanding of himself. The complete recording did not support the petitioner's claim of fraudulent intent. The complete recording was, in fact, the single clearest piece of evidence available that the testator had anticipated exactly the marriage that had occurred and had structured her will specifically to make it possible. He paused at the end and looked at the judge. The decedent did not leave a mystery, Your Honor. She left an answer. The court has just heard it. Judge Kwan reviewed her notes for 4 minutes in complete silence. Then she looked up and delivered her ruling with the efficiency of someone who has reached a clear conclusion and sees no reason to decorate it. The preliminary challenge was denied. The evidentiary record, taken in full, did not support a finding of fraudulent intent. The marriage had been entered legally, continued genuinely, and the will's conditions had been satisfied in both form and substance. The petitioner's right to refile on new grounds remained available under procedural rules, but the current challenge was dismissed with a finding that the submitted evidence, including the audio recording submitted by the petitioner herself, supported rather than undermined the validity of the marriage. She gathered her materials and left the bench. The room began to move. Do-hyun sat for a moment without moving, hands flat on the table, and allowed himself exactly the duration of 3 breaths to feel the full weight of what had just happened. Not the victory, which was real, but which he was not yet ready to name that way, but the specific texture of the moment, the particular quality of having run out of road and found that the ground held. Then he got up. Jung was shaking hands with his associates, already making notes for the follow-up documentation the ruling would require. Do-hyun put a hand on his shoulder briefly, which for him was the equivalent of a standing ovation, and Jung received it the way a man receives something he has worked hard for and is glad of without needing to perform gladness. Amara was standing 2 feet away. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything immediately, and the nothing they said contained more than most conversations. Then she said, "Your grandmother." "Yes," he said. "She knew all of it." "Yes." Amara was quiet for a moment. There was something in her face that he recognized as the expression she wore when she was holding an emotion that was too large and too specific to be expressed through normal channels. The same expression she'd had when her mother had called with the Copenhagen enrollment confirmation, when she'd received her first major research grant, when things that mattered enormously arrived in forms too real to be easily spoken. "She gave us this," she said. "She gave us the reason," he said. "We did the rest." Across the room, Seorin was standing with Woo in a brief, low-voiced exchange that ended quickly. Woo gathered his materials and left. Seorin stood alone for a moment, and then she did something Do-hyun had not expected. She crossed the room. She stopped in front of him, close enough that this was a private conversation rather than a public one. Her composure was present, but the architecture of it was visible in a way it hadn't been all morning, the way structures become visible when the pressure on them is sufficient. "I'm not going to file again," she said. He looked at her without speaking. "I want you to know that. Not because I think I was wrong about the businesses. I'm not wrong about that, and I think you know it. But because—" She stopped. Something behind her eyes was working through something it hadn't finished processing. "Because I heard her voice in that room." He was still. "She told you she would write it anyway," Seorin said. "And she did. And she never told me. She never said anything to me about any of it. She just built the condition and waited." A pause, very brief, very controlled. "I spent 14 months on this. 14 months of planning and waiting and spending money and pulling in favors. And in the end, what stopped me was a sentence she said to you 2 years ago that she never thought I would hear." Her jaw tightened fractionally. "That's what she left me. Not a condition, not an answer, just the proof that she was always thinking about you." He looked at his cousin, at the thin-wristed, composed woman who had spent her life as a satellite in a family that never redirected its gravity, who had built a 14-month campaign out of the specific kind of patience that grows in people who have been waiting their whole lives to be acknowledged, and had found, at the end of it, that the answer was the same one she'd always received. He had spent months hating what she had done. The feeling was still there. But underneath it, visible now in the aftermath, was something else, the specific sadness that belongs to clear sight, to seeing someone accurately rather than only as the threat they've presented. "Come to the board meeting in May," he said. She looked at him. "You just won the hearing." "The businesses are real," he said. "You were right about that. I have run the organization, and I have not run the businesses the way she built them. I know that. The board knows it." He paused. "Come to the meeting. Bring the argument you were going to make to this court. Make it to the board instead." Seorin looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her face that was not quite any single emotion. Too many things at once, arriving in too short a time to be sorted cleanly. "Why?" she said. "Because she built those businesses for 30 years, and someone who understands them should be involved in where they go." He held her gaze. "And because you are the only other person in this family who has ever actually paid attention to what she built." The thing behind Seorin's eyes settled into something that was quieter than anything he had seen there in 5 months. Not gratitude. She was not a person who produced gratitude quickly or easily, but something that recognized the offer for what it was, which was not charity, which was not performance. She said, "I'll think about it." "That's enough," he said. She left. He watched her go. Amara appeared at his shoulder. What was that? The end of something, he said. Hopefully. You offered her the board. I offered her a seat. There's a difference. Amara was quiet for a moment. Then, she'll take it. Probably. And then you'll have to actually manage that. Yes. She made a sound that was not quite a laugh, something adjacent to it, something that recognized the particular quality of winning something and immediately confronting the next problem. All right, she said. Let's go home. They went home. The apartment received them the way it had been receiving them for 5 months, with the particular silence of a space that has become used to being inhabited, that carries the specific imprint of two people's routines and preferences, and the small accumulated evidence of a shared life. Amara's reading glasses on the counter, the cardamom tea on the second shelf, the coffee press that had been his alone for 9 years and was now associated inseparably with 5:30 in the morning and her hands around a warm cup. Do-hyun stood in this kitchen and looked at it all for a moment. Then he called his mother. The call lasted 19 minutes. His mother spoke for most of them, not, as he had expected, about the hearing, which she addressed only briefly and with the specific economy of someone setting aside a subject they had concluded about rather than one they wanted to discuss. She spoke about his grandmother, about a conversation she had had with the older woman 3 months before her death, a conversation his mother had not mentioned to anyone, in which Grandmother Kang had said, with the same unhurried certainty she had deployed on the recording, that Do-hyun had already found the person he would spend his life with and needed only the architecture to make it visible. She told me it was Amara, his mother said. Her voice on the phone had a different quality than it had in any room they had shared in the past 5 months. Smaller, more accurate. I told her she was being romantic. She told me I was being small. He didn't say anything. Your grandmother was not usually wrong about people, his mother said. No, he said. She wasn't. A pause. Bring her to dinner. Not a family dinner, just us. When? Sunday, his mother said. I'll cook. He told Amara after he hung up. She was at her desk, laptop open, already returned to the work that the day had interrupted, because that was Amara. The world could conduct its dramas, and she would walk back into her laboratory when they were finished. She listened to what his mother had said, and her hand, which had been moving across the trackpad, went still. She's going to cook, Amara said. Yes. Park Soon-hee is going to cook dinner for me. That appears to be what's happening. Amara sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Your grandmother has been running this operation from beyond the grave for 5 months, and I'm only now understanding the full scope of it. He almost smiled. It was the first time in a long time that the thing in his face that preceded a smile had actually arrived somewhere close to its destination. She was thorough, he said. She was extraordinary, Amara said. And the way she said it, with the specific respect of one person recognizing the quality of another, was one of the more complete things he had heard anyone say about Grandmother Kang, who had been many things and had done many things, and who had, in the end, understood the people she loved with an accuracy that none of them had managed to understand themselves. The Copenhagen call came 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in May, when Amara was at the lab and Do-hyun was in a board meeting that he stepped out of to take it, because Amara's name on his screen during lab hours meant something was happening that she wanted him to know immediately. She said, "The doctors called this morning. The trial results." Her voice was doing the thing it did when the emotion was very large and she was moving through it carefully rather than around it. She's in full remission. He stood in the corridor outside the board meeting with his hand pressed flat against the wall and his eyes closed, and something moved through his chest that had no syndicate vocabulary and no legal vocabulary and no vocabulary at all. Just the physical sensation of something enormous resolving, a thing that had been held in tension for years finally releasing. Do-hyun, Amara said. Her voice was different now. The careful management was gone. She made it. I know, he said. His voice came out rougher than he'd intended. He didn't try to correct it. There was a sound on the line that might have been Amara, or might have been the ambient noise of a laboratory, or might have been both at once. I need to go call her, she said. Go, he said. I'll be home at 6. I'll be there. He went back into this board meeting and sat down and said nothing about the call, and nobody in that room. His senior lieutenants, the external advisors, Seorin, who had come to the May meeting as she had said she would think about, and had sat at the far end of the table and made the argument for the business's development trajectory that was genuinely the most cogent thing said in the room all morning. Nobody needed to know what had just happened in the corridor. Some things were too real for rooms. The summer moved through its months. Soren came to every board meeting. She presented, pushed back, argued for positions with the precise and relentless intelligence that had built her 14-month campaign, and that, redirected toward legitimate purpose, turned out to be exactly what the businesses needed. She and Do-hyun did not become close. They became something more durable than close. Two people who had looked at each other across the full range of what they were capable of and had found a working relationship on the other side of it. Respect built from clear sight was not warm. It was solid, which was better. His father, Kang Byung-soo, came to the apartment once in August without announcement, which was unprecedented. He stood in the kitchen and accepted coffee and looked at the apartment the way a man looks at a place that has turned out to be different from what he assumed, which is to say, with the specific discomfort of being required to update. He stayed 40 minutes. He said very little. When he left, he shook Do-hyun's hand with the particular gravity that the elder Kang reserved for things he took seriously, and then he looked at Amara and inclined his head. Not an apology, not quite, but the closest the man would come to one, and she received it with the directness she brought to everything and said, "Thank you for coming," and meant it without irony. The organization continued. Do-hyun ran it the way he had always run it, with the long discipline of someone who understood that the syndicate was not going to be dismantled in a day or a year or possibly in his lifetime. But that direction mattered, that the choices made at the top accumulated into something over time. That the difference between an organization that moved toward legitimacy and one that didn't was the cumulative weight of 10,000 small decisions made by someone who had decided something. He made the decisions. The organization moved, slowly, imperfectly, with resistance from people who preferred the old structure, but it moved. Amara published her research. The paper came out in October in a journal that had twice rejected her earlier work. And when it appeared online, she sat at her desk at 5 in the morning before the city was awake and read it with the careful attention of someone checking whether what they built in private holds up in public. Do-hyun brought coffee and sat across from her and didn't speak, which was the right thing to do because she didn't need words at that moment. She needed presence. And he had learned with great precision the difference between the two. When she finished reading, she closed the laptop and looked out the window at the lightening Seoul sky. "It's good," she said. "I know," he said. "You haven't read it." "I've watched you work on it for 8 months," he said. "I know when your work is good. It's the same face you make when the coffee is right." She looked at him. Something in her expression went the way it sometimes did, past the composure, past the directness, to the version of her that was only present in this apartment and only in the hours before Seoul fully committed to its day. 13 years, she said. "I know. We wasted 13 years. We spent 13 years becoming people who could have this without ruining it," he said. "That's not the same thing." She considered this for a long moment. Then she reached across the counter and put her hand over his, and the gesture had the weight of everything that had arrived at it. The 5 months of managed distance, the 4 months of dismantling, the hearing room and the corridor, and the phone call from Copenhagen, and the board meetings and the Sunday dinners where his mother cooked and learned to mean it, all of it, the full accumulated mass of what a life built towards something looks like when it finally gets there. "I'm pregnant," she said. He looked at her. She met his eyes with the directness she brought to everything. 8 weeks. I confirmed yesterday. I was waiting for the right... She stopped. There wasn't a right moment. I just needed a morning. The kitchen was very quiet. The city outside was beginning to move. The light through the east-facing window was catching the coffee press the way it did on clear mornings, the way Amara had noticed in the first weeks of living here and mentioned once and then never mentioned again because it was one of those things that didn't require words after the first time. He got up from the stool and came around the counter and put both arms around her, and she let him, which she always did now without the fraction of hesitation that had been present in the first months. She leaned into it the way a person leans into something they have stopped needing permission for. "Tell me what you need," he said. "Right now? Right now and everything after." She was quiet for a moment against his shoulder. Right now, I need to go to the lab because I have a student defense at 9. She paused. And I need you to not be strange about this. Define strange. The thing where you become excessively protective and start walking into rooms first. I already walk into rooms first. More so, she said. Don't do it more so. He almost smiled. The thing that preceded a smile had been arriving much more regularly in the past months, had become less surprising to him as a sensation. I'll try, he said. She pulled back and looked at him, read his face with the 23-year accuracy she brought to it, apparently satisfied with what she found. She picked up her coffee cup, drank the last of it, put it in the sink. Do-hyun, she said, pulling on her jacket. Yes. Your grandmother was right about everything. Yes, he said. She was. She left. He listened to the elevator close. He stood in the kitchen for a while longer, in the particular silence of the apartment after her departure, which was a different quality of silence from before. Not empty, not the absence of a thing, but the silence of a space that carries someone's presence even when they're gone. The reading glasses on the counter, the second shelf, the east-facing window. He poured out his cold coffee and made fresh and drank it standing at the window looking at the city, which had no interest in his life and never had, which would continue its enormous indifferent motion regardless of what happened inside any single apartment on any floor of any building, and which was, for that reason, a reliable witness. It had seen all of it. The courthouse in November, the boardroom in March, the corridor outside the hearing room, the kitchen at 5:30 every morning for the better part of a year. It had seen it and said nothing and kept moving, the way cities do, the way time does, carrying everything forward without comment. The 5-year contract expired on a Thursday in early November, 5 years to the month from the courthouse. They had discussed this, briefly, practically, in the manner they discussed most things that had already been decided and needed only logistical confirmation. Attorney Jeong had handled the documentation. The legitimate businesses were fully transitioned. The legal requirements of the will had been satisfied in every particular. The estate was settled. It was, in every formal sense, done. That evening, Do-hyun came home to the apartment that had been their apartment for 5 years and found it full of people. Amara's mother, 4 years out from Copenhagen, and ferociously, vividly present, holding their daughter Yuna with the specific joy of grandmothers who have been told they might not get to be grandmothers and have therefore taken the role with both hands. His own parents, his father moving more slowly than 5 years ago but present, his mother in the kitchen with Amara in a way that had taken 2 years to become natural and was now simply what it was. Jong and his wife. Choi, who had been with Do-hyun for 14 years and who looked at the room with the expression of a man who has seen many things and is glad, specifically and privately, to be seeing this one. Seorin, who had come because Amara had called her directly, a call that had surprised Seorin enough that she'd said yes before she'd finished deciding, and who was standing near the window with a glass in her hand looking at the room with an expression that was not entirely comfortable and was entirely genuine, which was the most Seorin had ever offered in any room Do-hyun could remember. Yuna was 2.5 and had Do-hyun's watchfulness and Amara's forward certainty and a laugh that she deployed without restraint and that had, in 28 months, done more to alter the internal climate of the Kang family than anything else in its history. She was currently explaining something to Amara's mother with the specific conviction of a person who believes their point is both correct and underappreciated. Amara found Do-hyun in the doorway and came to him, and he put his arm around her, and for a moment they just stood there looking at the room, at the specific collection of people and noise and light that their lives had produced. Technically, we're done, she said. The contract expired this morning. I know. Jung confirmed the filing. I know. She looked up at him. So? He looked at her. At the face he had known for 30 years and had been willing to lose 13 years of because he was afraid of the specific cost of wanting what he wanted. At the face that had been the first and last thing he was aware of in the apartment every morning and every night for 5 years. At the face that had been present in a courtroom and a hospital waiting room and a board meeting and 1,000 ordinary Tuesday mornings that had accumulated into the only version of his life he wanted. So, he said, I have been waiting 5 years to ask you something. She went still. He reached into his jacket pocket. Not a production, not the dramatic gesture, not the performance, just the specific movement of a man who had thought about this particular moment with great care and had concluded that the only right way to do it was simply and directly and in front of everyone who had witnessed what it had taken to get here. The ring was new, not the courthouse ring, not the functional November ring that had been about the contract. Something he had chosen himself, slowly, without asking anyone's opinion, because this was the version that was only about what he wanted and what he was choosing and who he was choosing it with. "Amara Brooks," he said. She was looking at the ring in his hand. Her eyes were very bright. Not crying, or not yet, just the specific brightness of a person on the threshold of something they have wanted for a very long time that is arriving in exactly the form it was supposed to. "I have been choosing you since we were 11 years old," he said. "I was just too afraid to say it. I am not afraid anymore." He paused. "Will you stay?" She looked at him for a moment with the full weight of 30 years and 13 years of silence and 5 years of everything it had taken, and their daughter's voice in the other room and the city outside and the east-facing window and the cardamom tea and every 5:30 morning. "I've been staying," she said. "I've been staying the whole time." He put the ring on her finger. Behind them, the room had gone quiet. The specific quiet of people who understand they are witnessing the true version of something that started as something else and became, through the hard, ordinary work of two people refusing to give up on each other, exactly what it was always supposed to be. Una, unconcerned with the gravity of the moment, announced something to the room in the firm, declarative tone of a person who feels her observations are consistently undervalued. Everyone laughed, and the apartment that had started as a contract, that had been entered with careful boundaries and managed distance and the specific discipline of two people protecting something they couldn't yet name, opened up around all of them, warm and full and entirely, irrevocably real. Outside, Soul kept moving. It always did. Enormous, indifferent, carrying everything forward. But in this apartment, on this floor, with the city's lights coming through the east-facing window, and the ring on her finger and their daughter's voice, and the people who had been shaped and broken and reshaped by everything the past 5 years had required, in here, things had stopped moving in the way that only the most settled and certain things are allowed to stop. Not because they had arrived at an ending, because they had finally arrived at a beginning that intended to last.